everyone. On behalf of the Seattle Asian American Film Festival, I would like to welcome some of our filmmakers from our program, The Six. Thank you so much for sharing your film and joining us for a conversation. So just to start, I'll ask everyone to do a quick introduction with your name, how, your role on this film, and where you are joining from. And I can start to give you a moment just to get settled. So I'm Yaoyao. I am the volunteer manager at SAAFF, and I'm calling in from Seattle.
Hi, I am Luo Tong. I'm the producer of The Six, and I am calling in from Shanghai.
Hi, I'm Matthew. I'm an associate producer on The Six and also a member of the research team, and I am also calling in from Shanghai.
Wonderful. Well, good morning to both of you. So exciting to have this international conversation going about a very, international film, a kind of going between, these different places. And I guess my first question is really about sort of a starting point for the project. I think a lot of filmmakers begin with a specific scene in mind, or maybe like a topic they want to cover. And so I was wondering sort of what was the starting point for both of you getting involved with this project?
Well, Stephen, our lead character, he's an old friend of mine and the director, Arthur. So we've been known each other for more than 20 years. And 12 years ago, we also made another documentary with him being the lead character. So we kind of had this thing going on for a while. And 6 years ago, he came to me and Arthur and told us that he read an article about Titanic, and there were Chinese passengers on Titanic. So he's a diver, and anything to do with, because he's also been living in China for more than 20 years. So anything to do with China or any stories in the marine world, that's his thing. And then somehow this story has brought the two kind of his favorite things to get together, and he was fascinated about it. And he said, I'm going to go on a research and to find out more about the hidden story, why no one knows about it, and we never heard of it. We've all watched the James Cameron's Titanic years ago, and no one knew that there were Chinese passengers on board. So we were like, okay. So at the beginning, it was just Arthur and Stephen. They kind of started a little two-people team and tried to connect with some of the survivors, descendants in the States and in the UK. And that went on for a while. And after a while, the research kind of got deeper into a more complicated status. So it really required experts to help, like to dig out more, and then to have local people who were based in the area to help us find more information from like archive center, libraries. So then we were connected with a lot of professional researchers, and then at that point, I think I came in on board, and then we wanted to make a documentary, and we wanted to follow Stephen's route, following him, finding out the stories throughout the whole process. And he was also writing a book about it. So that kind of format was established from our last film called the Poseidon Project. So naturally we brought our team on board, and Matthew was also working with us, and he became one of the lead researchers on this particular film, this project as well. So everything started kind of naturally.
Yeah, very much. Just to add on to what LT has said, it really was that, it's slightly cliche, but that sort of snowballing effect of different people getting involved.
But in any case, kind of getting into, talking about the snowballing, sort of researching these, additional topics. I mean, the film itself, when I started watching, I never expected all these connections to like Angel Island, for example, and the poetry on the walls there, or even just the sprawling variety of locations from London to sort of ancestral villages. So yeah, definitely got a sense of how that project unfolded, even just from viewing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the way that as LT said, the project began with Stephen and this this sort of nugget of knowledge, a thing that he'd read somewhere about there being Chinese passengers, Chinese survivors of the Titanic. But there came a point where we often talk about Titanic as being this sort of time capsule of class and culture and society from 100 years ago. And I think in the same, if you take that same idea to our Chinese passengers, then of course their story, their experiences, the things that they were forced to go through become this larger sort of time capsule of, the broader Chinese diaspora and I guess Asian diaspora experience in the early 20th century. So yeah, inevitably we were going to end up at places like Angel Island. We were going to end up in places like the UK talking about the two mass expulsions of Chinese men after the wars. So yeah, it was fascinating the different directions that we could go in with it.
And kind of hearing more about that process of development, I'd be interested to know kind of from beginning or kind of the point where you started to get involved all the way up to the final cut. What would you say is the biggest change you saw in the film?
The biggest change, this project has lasted for more than 5 years, 6 years. There were researchers that worked on it from the very beginning and have changed because different stages we require different sets of skills. And then some people, at the beginning they were volunteers, they were students, and they worked on certain period of our research for a while, and then they moved on. I think overall, it's hard to say that. Matthew, what would you say? The changes.
It's interesting because of course LT as a producer is very much, she's one of the hearts of our team and is always thinking about the people behind the scenes. But I guess for the audience, as you're watching this in the story, the heart of the film perhaps is the journey that Tom Fong, the Wisconsin man whose father was one of the 6 survivors, and that journey. Tom, like some of our researchers, is someone who we connected to very early on in the production, and exactly the way that it's shown in the film. And you hear his story about how he didn't find this out until after his father had passed away. He found it out sort of by accident and never had this opportunity to validate, to prove, disprove. Not that he doubted his father, but it's such a fantastical thing to be told. And so I guess for me, the biggest sort of change over the course of making the film was sort of being able to help Tom to solve that mystery, to know his father better, to understand how his father fits into the broader Asian American, Chinese American experience. And I think the way that story unfolds on screen is very emotional as well. Even knowing how it ends, and yeah. So for me, that was the biggest change.
I can add on in that way. Because 6 years ago, no one knew there were Chinese passengers on board Titanic. It's such an important story in history in the world, and now that a lot of people know about it, and now a lot of people know why no one was telling this story. And then that, I think it's kind of, it got people into thinking about it. Why was the reason behind it? That part of the story, why was it never told? Now, I think in a way that's kind of changed people's attitude towards you know, protecting the minority group, protecting the you know, the people who are not in their in power to speak up for themselves. That in that way, I think a lot of people now are talking about it. I don't know what you know, the actual facts will change, but at least we got into the stage where this becomes a thing that people can start think about. That is something that I think that's changed.
I see so much of that connection to contemporary events related to immigration in the film too, when it kind of flashes forward to a lot of activism around those issues. I mean, and you know, it's come up before even our conversation, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and how it had such a huge impact on the lives of these survivors because they simply were turned away. And I would just like to hear, you know, both of your perspectives too, especially being based in China and maybe seeing, you know, what's unfolding in the US from a different perspective than those of us living here, really getting your sense of, you know, what connections do you make between that historical phenomenon, you know, anti-immigrant sentiment then, and also connecting it to kind of today's issues?
Matthew? I think I've said what I wanted to say. Actually, I think making this film, well, the journey started with just a research of the surface. It's a story, it's a hidden part of the history that no one knew about it. And then after a while, when you dug deeper and you found all those, you know, hidden stories that no one knew about it. Why did they change their names? Why did he not even tell any of his family members about that part of the history? That was something, a huge historical background behind it. And then that part, when we, you know, found out more about that part of the history, and then a lot of truth kind of came on surface, and then that, you know what happened has already happened, but what happened is still happening now, and that is something that I think somehow through telling this story shines a light on the current affairs, and people will be, I hope people will be inspired, will be, you know, we will have a kind of a solid base where they know that this kind of stories, this kind of incidents start a long time ago, and then we're still trying to make a change, to make something good happen. And that is something that I think I can't say the purpose of the film, because when we started it, we didn't even think of that. But somehow it has this effect on people now that it helps them kind of I don't know how to describe it.
I mean, I was absolutely getting that sense of things, really the conversation about how you know, these stories are part of history, and even though they are kept secret in some cases, and there's good reason for that, you know, thinking about discussion of paper sons and all that went into immigration at the time, but that's not, you know, that doesn't mean that they're not important stories and ones that are really meaningful to a family, and sometimes in the case of, you know, the survivors here, meaningful in a much larger scheme of things, in a huge historical way. Yeah, and you never know unless you really start talking and start asking those questions. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think you put it. I think you put it very well. That, you know, different people respond to it in different ways. I think we maybe look at the film a different way, coming from the production side of it. But for me, it was fascinating just to think even about the way that the film was not just talked about, but marketed in different parts of the world. So, I mean, we had a fantastic theatrical release here in China. The movie was out on thousands of screens nationwide. Some really wonderful reviews, feedback from the audience, and so forth. but for a lot of people here, the way into the story, as Luo Tong was mentioning earlier, is this idea of it being about Titanic. Everyone knows the James Cameron movie and so forth. And so I think at least initially for a lot of audience here, it was realizing that the Chinese nation, the Chinese people have stake in the story of Titanic. It's not just something that's fancy and aspirational and happened thousands of miles away. It's something that Chinese people were a part of. And I think I guess in a way you sort of start to see this across all people's connections to it, like being able to say, oh, well, my ancestors, or people like my ancestors, or people like who I am today, they survived, or they were mistreated, or they were heroes, or they were, well, people tend not to claim villains, but yeah, I think different people find different routes into it. And then the way we were able to expand the story out, for example, the aspects of it that we took to the UK, and Yvonne Foley and the experiences that her and her family and families like her had, realizing that it's all part of the same fabric. And being able to say, well, all right, so let's take that opportunity to tell Yvonne's story, and then how many other people have had this experience. We, at the end of the movie, you see very briefly some clips of protests in New York against Donald Trump's anti-Muslim policies, and seeing how there's, even prior to the film coming out, we were seeing our news articles referencing the Chinese Exclusion Act in the context of that march. And there's all these different parallels, and we talk about learning from history and so forth. So different people, different ways. Sorry, I feel like I spun off. it's a little early in the morning here.
I mean, the story is so interconnected to all these different topics. I feel like it's very easy to kind of go off in so many directions, just as the film does itself. Something that really stuck with me, and it is interesting to hear about showing in the theaters in China versus, I'm Chinese American. I grew up in the U.S. and how I view it is definitely different than that too. And for me, one of the most heartfelt parts of the film was hearing the poem recited from one of the survivors, which was taken from his letter, and it had made it all the way back to China. And I was wondering if you all could describe how you approach kind of incorporating as much as you could, like the original voices of the six, or any kind of personality traits they might have had. I know there was a conversation about signatures, and one of them even just had made a mark. Yeah, so really trying to get an approach of showing a little bit of who they were.
It's a fascinating process. Even for the name, we found so many kind of matching. In the old days, when you wrote down records of a Chinese person's name, you usually would write down the spelling with the pronunciation. So we had for a while we had a variety of for one person, like up to 7 or 8 different kind of similar pronunciations, but in the end we kind of through different records and matched up with similar handwriting with the Chinese characters. That's how we found out. That's how we confirmed, okay, that was the same person, and he was on board on a different ship, and then a year later he was found with the same signature record on that piece of document, and that's how we kind of connect them together. And that kind of process went on for a long time, and until the last minute, I think we were still, even for Tom's father, we were still trying to kind of piece together all the information we had. And we 90% we were kind of sure that it was him. It was really, he was here, he was there. And then in the end, we found his records, and that was the moment we realized, okay, the whole 4-5 years of our work made sense, and all the stories that we can put together, it showed at the end it was him. So that process was going on throughout the entire production. Even when we were like already in the phase of editing the film, new information still kept coming in. So yeah, it's a fascinating process.
That's amazing that you were editing as, I'm thinking about like finding the letters, getting that information. Like it's so wild to think that you're already in the process of making the film, and still these key pieces are still coming up towards the end.
So that's why we actually sometimes we would like halfway through some of the edit, we actually had to because new information came in, we had to kind of change the direction a little bit on the film, because the story now is different. And the poem actually, it was fascinating. We were initially, we had no expectation of finding this poem. We just went on to the island, like usual. We probably like, because it's an island in the southeast coast of China. So we went there quite regularly just to talk to the village people, and every time we had new kind of discovery, we would bring the information down there and talk to the people who were original family members from Tom. And then one day, this old guy, he was a nephew of a great nephew of Tom's father, Tom Fong.
Tom Fong. Yeah.
Tom Fong's father, Fong Wing's son. And he just suddenly read out this poem. He said, now I remember, my uncle read me a poem. He was telling me the story about him on a ship and in water, and this old guy sitting in front of us, and he could memorize the whole poem. He just suddenly read out, and we were like, oh my God, what? That is the story of Feng Wing-sun's life. And so we would one of our researchers was sitting right next to Stephen, and then because he was reading out in kind of Cantonese, so it took her to translate. And once Stephen heard the meaning of the poem, and he was like, oh my God, that's the kind of epiphany moment. He suddenly realized, oh my God, all the stories that we went on in the UK and the US and now back in China, and now it all makes sense. It's all kind of coming together. So we took the poem back to the States to talk to Professor Yang, because she was the expert on Chinese poem at that period. And so she explained to us what it meant and what kind of forms and why it was like that. And then so that was when the Angel Island part came on board, on surface. That was the part of the history that somehow connected to the poem that we found. And then she told us there were a lot of similar poems on Angel Island in the detention center, and it was engraved onto the wall, and that was so much vengeance, and so many family members that were kept there during that period. So it was completely out of our expectation. We it's quite hard to plan. It's not like a feature film where you plan everything, 3 months shooting here, a month shooting there. The kind of content you will be shooting, exactly what you want to do. But for documentary stories like these, we just follow wherever the leads take us to. And suddenly there's a story in Los Angeles, we had to go there and find out more. So it's kind of exciting. A lot of unknown area prior to planning. From the producer's perspective, it's quite difficult. It's chaotic because you were like, suddenly, what? There's a new story in Canada. I'm running out of budget. So you have to find another pool of money to support your team to go there, transportation, traveling, all that. But, in the end, it all turned out to be worth it because the story is well told, and it is a kind of a complete to this day. I think we've done the amount of research work that we've done. It's really worth the money.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I mean, like there's so much, there's a lot of stuff we did that just didn't end up in the film ultimately. And as LT said, like Stephen is writing a book at the moment that will kind of expand out on some of that. But yeah, what you see on film is the condensing of those 5-6 years of research. There's more story out there, and yeah, I hope people will have the chance to read Stephen's book. It's been published in Chinese only to begin with, but hopefully there'll be an English language copy coming up in the not too distant future. But yeah, just being able to sort of find their own way into it, find your own way of connecting with the material, I think is really valuable as well.
I mean, it's really remarkable just to hear that these, personal stories, of course you can't plan what you discover. So it's just incredible to hear, that story shared about one of the survivors giving milk to the kids, when he owned that shop. And, I think of something like this when you're writing like an essay or something, you plan all your primary sources. But of course, in your process, there's no way to know what those sources are. And yeah, it's just going out on a limb and then finding that really, nugget of personality in so many of these figures. And
but exactly as I was saying, like the stories of these kind of people, of working class people, of immigrants, they're not deemed worthy of being written about. And it's only when researchers like ourselves, whether it be filmmakers or writers, happen upon them by accident, that they get remembered. Now people have this image of Li Bing in their minds as being someone who went through this awful traumatic event, managed to settle himself, was a member of a community, was an active member of a community, was somebody who people wanted to remember and remember fondly. How often do we get to hear those stories of, in this case, Chinese Canadians from that period of history? They're always spoken about in highly racialized, very prejudiced ways, reflective of the way that they were treated by government and other agencies. So just that, it is such a beautiful image, walking down 3 flights of stairs to give free milk to kids just because you wanted to be nice. I think I love that little story.
And I think that we'll just be closing out our time today with a final question for the both of you. Is just, what advice would you give to emerging documentary filmmakers or documentary producers?
LT?
I think when you find a subject that you are really passionate about, I think you just try your best to put all your resources together and do it. That's how you can start, because if you don't do it, if you don't make an action on it, the moment will just go. And it's better to capture it than to wait till you're fully ready with all sorts of funding and other stuff. But then by then your precious story moment will probably just be gone. So I think if you are, we're actually making a few more other projects, documentaries, and I that make me feel that made me realize that whenever things happen around you, and if you have access to, you just go and film and record it one day, even, maybe for a while it's going to be there and you don't know what you can do. Maybe you don't have the funding to make it happen, to make it into a full-length documentary, or you don't have the resources to distribute it. But once the story is there, it's going to be there forever. And then, one day people will see it. And that's the value of the work that a documentary filmmaker does, I think. So just do it.
Yeah, exactly the same advice. I mean, people often talk about, I don't have the resources or whatever. I think I usually respond to that with some of the worst films I have ever seen cost the most money. So having resources, having money doesn't necessarily make a better movie. We're a film company, but we're a very small one, and we still managed. As I say, I started researching this in my spare time between copywriting assignments. This is it's passion that drives you forward, and when you have the opportunity to engage with an idea as exciting as the one that started off the six, I think LT is completely right. Jump on it. It's not just your opportunity; it's an opportunity to make a difference in, if not the world, at least in the discourse, in the way, giving other people the tools that they need to look at the world a different way. And that's the beauty of documentary.
And there is just so much in your documentary to really bring that out. And I'm so happy that you're both able to join me for this Q&A today. And so I will just close out by saying thank you to the audience for joining the 10th Seattle Asian American Film Festival. We greatly appreciate your support of the festival and community. If you have not done so already, please take a moment to fill out the festival survey. A confirmation link is in your email. Data from surveys help us get grants and sponsorships that make the festival possible. And also check out our other programs at seattleaaff.org. Tickets are still available. On behalf of the festival, thank you for joining us.